When was the last time you looked in the mirror and felt like you were staring at a stranger? Not your physical appearance, but something deeper, something that whispers you've become someone you don't recognize, someone you never intended to be. This isn't about vanity or superficial concerns. This is about the soul-crushing realization that somewhere along the way you stopped being yourself and started being who everyone else wanted you to be. Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, understood this torment better than anyone. He knew that most people live their entire lives wearing masks, so convincing that they forget their own face lies underneath. Jung called this the persona, the character we play to win approval, to fit in, to survive in a world that punishes authenticity and rewards conformity. But here's what Jung discovered that will shake you to your core. The very society that promises to protect and nurture you is systematically destroying the most precious thing you possess, your authentic self. Think about it. From the moment you drew your first breath, the world began telling you who you should be. Your parents, with their own broken dreams and unfulfilled desires, projected their expectations onto your blank canvas of possibility. Your teachers rewarded compliance and punished creativity. Your peers mocked anything that deviated from the norm. Your culture handed you a script and demanded you perform it flawlessly, and you did. Because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. You learned to suppress the wild, untamed parts of yourself, the parts that felt too intense, too different, too much. You discovered that certain thoughts were unacceptable, certain emotions were shameful, certain desires were wrong, so you pushed them down into what Jung called the shadow, that dark repository of everything you've rejected about yourself. But here's the psychological truth that will change everything. Those rejected parts didn't disappear. They're still there, festering in the darkness of your unconscious mind, creating the very conflicts and dissatisfaction you feel today. Ask yourself this question and answer honestly. How many of your current goals are actually yours, and how many are just sophisticated versions of seeking mommy and daddy's approval? How many of your relationships are built on who you really are versus who you think you need to be loved? The answer terrifies most people, because when you start pulling at this thread, everything begins to unravel. Jung understood that we don't just accidentally lose ourselves. Society has a vested interest in your conformity. It needs you to be predictable, manageable, controllable. It needs you to want the same things as everyone else so it can sell you solutions. It needs you to fear the same things so it can promise you safety. It needs you to hate the same things so it can unite you against common enemies. Your authentic self is dangerous to this system. Your authentic self asks uncomfortable questions. Your authentic self refuses to accept things simply because that's how it's always been done. Your authentic self threatens the established order by its very existence. So society did what any threatened system does. It weaponized your deepest need for connection and belonging against you. It made acceptance conditional on performance. It taught you that love must be earned through compliance. It convinced you that your worth depends on external validation. This is how the invisible prison was built around you. Not with bars and walls, but with shame and fear. Not with force, but with the promise that if you just try hard enough to be who they want you to be, you'll finally be enough. But you never are you? No matter how perfectly you perform, no matter how successfully you check all the boxes, something inside you remains hungry. Something inside you knows this isn't right. Something inside you remembers what it felt like to be free. That something is your shadow calling you home. Jung discovered that what we most hate in others is usually what we've most rejected in ourselves. The colleague who speaks their mind too freely, that's your suppressed authenticity staring back at you. The person who seems selfish for putting their needs first, that's your denied self-care reflecting in the mirror. The individual who refuses to follow the rules, that's your own rebellious spirit that you've caged. This is projection in its most insidious form. Society taught you to police not just your own authenticity, but everyone else's too. You became an enforcer of the very system that imprisoned you. You learned to shame others for displaying the qualities you secretly long to express. The most painful part, you do this unconsciously. You genuinely believe you're being moral, righteous, appropriate. You have no idea you're perpetuating the cycle that's slowly killing your soul. Think about the last time someone really annoyed you. not just mildly irritated, but genuinely triggered. What specifically about their behavior bothered you? Jung would tell you to look closer. That trigger is pointing directly at something you've disowned about yourself. The person who's too emotional. You've probably spent years suppressing your own feelings. The individual who's too selfish. You've likely sacrificed your needs so many times you've forgotten what you actually want. The one who's too rebellious. You've probably been following rules so long you've forgotten why they exist. Your shadow contains not just the negative traits you've rejected, but also your greatest gifts. Your power, your creativity, your passion, your truth. Society convinced you these were dangerous, so you locked them away. But imprisonment of your gifts is imprisonment of your soul. This is why you feel so empty, so disconnected, so fundamentally unsatisfied despite having everything you thought you wanted. You're living as a fraction of who you actually are. You're experiencing life through thick glass, always separated from direct contact with your own existence. Jung called the process of reclaiming these lost parts individuation, the courageous journey of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. But individuation requires you to do the most terrifying thing imaginable: disappoint people. It requires you to risk rejection by those whose approval you've spent your life seeking. It requires you to stand alone when everyone else is sitting down. It requires you to trust your inner compass, even when the whole world is telling you you're going the wrong way. Most people never take this journey. They're too afraid. They'd rather live as acceptable ghosts than risk being rejected as authentic humans. They choose the safety of conformity over the adventure of self-discovery. But here's what Jung knew that most people never learn. The very qualities you've rejected about yourself are often the keys to your greatest fulfillment. The sensitivity you've tried to suppress might be your pathway to deep connection. The anger you've learned to hide might be the fuel for necessary change. The weirdness you've attempted to normalize might be your unique contribution to the world. Your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your lost power calling you home. Society taught you to fear your shadow because society fears authentic individuals. Authentic people can't be controlled through shame. They can't be manipulated through guilt. They can't be sold solutions to problems they don't actually have. Authentic people trust themselves. They know the difference between their voice and everyone else's. They make decisions based on their values rather than others' expectations. They create rather than consume. They lead rather than follow. This is why your authenticity was systematically dismantled. This is why you learned to doubt your instincts, question your desires, and apologize for your existence. The system needed you small, manageable, dependent, but your psyche has been keeping score. Every time you betrayed yourself to gain approval, it made a note. Every time you said yes when you meant no, it remembered. Every time you performed rather than lived, it recorded the cost. That restlessness you feel, that's your psyche presenting you with the bill. That depression that seemingly comes from nowhere, that's your authentic self staging a revolt against the false life you've constructed. That anxiety that keeps you awake at night, that's the energy of your suppressed truth demanding expression. Your symptoms aren't random, they're messengers. They're your shadow's way of getting your attention, of letting you know that something essential is missing from your life, something that no amount of external success can replace. That something is you, the real you, the you that existed before the world told you who to be. Jung understood that psychological healing isn't about adding something new to your personality. It's about remembering something old. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you left behind in your desperate attempt to belong. But here's the paradox that will blow your mind. The moment you stop trying so hard to be accepted by everyone, you become acceptable to the people who actually matter. The moment you stop performing for approval, you attract people who love you for who you are. The moment you embrace your authentic self, you give others permission to do the same. Your authenticity isn't just about you. It's about breaking the generational cycle of self-abandonment. It's about showing your children that they don't have to choose between being themselves and being loved. It's about proving to everyone around you that it's possible to live as a whole human being in a world that profits from your fragmentation. This is why the stakes are so high. This isn't just about your personal fulfillment. This is about the future of human consciousness. This is about whether we continue to perpetuate systems that crush the human spirit, or whether we have the courage to model a different way of being. The journey back to yourself isn't easy. It requires you to question everything you've been taught about what makes a life valuable. It requires you to disappoint people who've grown comfortable with your performance. It requires you to face the terror of not knowing who you are beneath all the masks you've worn. But here's what Jung promised, and what I promise you. On the other side of that terror lies the most profound peace you've ever experienced, the peace of finally coming home to yourself, the peace of no longer needing to pretend, the peace of living from the inside out rather than the outside in. Your authentic self is still there, waiting beneath all the layers of conditioning and compromise. It's been patient, but it won't wait forever. Every day you delay is another day you'll never get back. Another day of living someone else's life instead of your own. The question isn't whether you're worthy of authenticity. You are. The question isn't whether you're capable of change. You are. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes to set yourself free from the invisible prison that's been holding you captive your entire life. Because that prison, it's not as strong as it appears. It's built from illusions, held together by fear, maintained by habit. The moment you truly see it for what it is, the moment you understand how it was constructed and why, that moment you realize you've had the key all along. That key is your willingness to face the truth about what you've sacrificed for acceptance, and your courage to begin the process of taking it back. But taking it back requires understanding exactly how these mechanisms of self-betrayal operate in your daily life, and why you've become so skilled at abandoning yourself that you don't even notice when you're doing it. Here's the uncomfortable truth: you didn't just accidentally lose yourself. You were systematically trained to betray yourself so thoroughly that it became second nature. The architecture of your false self wasn't built overnight. It was constructed brick by brick, choice by choice, compromise by compromise, until you became a master architect of your own psychological prison. Jung understood that we don't just have one false self, we have multiple personas for different situations. You have the persona you wear at work, the one you present to your family, the mask you show romantic partners, the version you become around certain friends. Each one carefully crafted to get you what you think you need from each situation. But here's what's killing you: you've become so good at switching between these personas that you've lost track of which one is actually you. You've become a method actor who's forgotten they're playing a role. Right now, think about your different relationships. Can you identify how you change depending on who you're with, how your voice changes, your posture shifts, your opinions adapt? This isn't just normal social flexibility. This is systematic self-abandonment disguised as social intelligence. The parent-pleaser persona never quite feels worthy of unconditional love, so it achieves and achieves and achieves, hoping that eventually the approval will come. But it never does, because approval based on performance is always temporary. You're only as good as your last success, only as loved as your last achievement. The people-pleaser persona has learned that conflict is dangerous, that disapproval is death, that making others uncomfortable might result in abandonment. So it says yes when it means no, apologizes for existing, and contorts itself into whatever shape will keep the peace. But the peace it maintains is a lie, because peace built on self-betrayal isn't peace at all. It's slow suicide. The achiever persona believes its worth is tied to its productivity, its success, its ability to impress others with its accomplishments. It's addicted to the drug of recognition, always chasing the next goal, the next milestone, the next external validation of its value. But no achievement is ever enough, because the achiever is trying to fill an internal void with external success. Jung knew that these personas aren't just personality traits, they're psychological defenses against the terror of rejection. Each one represents a different strategy for avoiding the thing you fear most, being abandoned for who you truly are. But here's the cruel irony: the very strategies you develop to avoid abandonment are actually causing it. By never showing your true self, you ensure that no one can ever truly know you. By constantly performing, you create relationships based on your act rather than your authenticity. By hiding your real thoughts and feelings, you guarantee that any love you receive is conditional and incomplete. You're dying of loneliness while surrounded by people who think they know you. You're starving for connection while maintaining relationships built on lies. You're desperately seeking acceptance while never giving anyone the chance to accept who you actually are. This is the psychology of self-betrayal in action, and it's killing you slowly, relationship by relationship, choice by choice, day by day. but the personas are just the surface level of this psychological architecture. The real construction happens in your unconscious mind, where Jung discovered something that will change how you see everything. You don't just hide your unacceptable traits from others, you hide them from yourself. Think about the qualities you most despise in other people. The ones that make your skin crawl, that trigger immediate judgment, that make you feel morally superior. Write them down if you have to. Arrogance, selfishness, laziness, dishonesty, cruelty. Whatever makes your blood boil. Now here's Jung's revolutionary insight. Those qualities you hate so passionately in others, they exist in you too. They have to, because you can't recognize in others what doesn't exist in yourself. You can only see what you have the capacity to understand. This is projection in its most devastating form. You've become so good at disowning your own unacceptable traits that you've convinced yourself you don't have them. Instead, you see them everywhere else. You become a detective of other people's flaws while remaining blind to your own. The person who constantly judges others for being fake is usually the one wearing the most masks. The individual who's always pointing out others' selfishness is typically the one who's never learned healthy self-care. The person who's forever criticizing others for being too sensitive is usually the one who's most afraid of their own emotions. Your projections are a map of your disowned self. Every trait you hate in others is a breadcrumb leading back to a part of yourself you've rejected. Every person who triggers you is a mirror reflecting something you refuse to see about yourself. But here's where it gets really twisted. Society taught you to be proud of your projections. It taught you that your ability to spot others' flaws is a form of moral clarity. It convinced you that your judgments are evidence of your virtue. It made you feel superior for seeing what others can't see about themselves. You became addicted to the feeling of being right about others' wrongness. You learned to bond with people through shared judgments, shared enemies, shared superiority. You built relationships on the foundation of mutual projection, where you validate each other's refusal to own your shadows. This is how the system perpetuates itself. It turns you into an enforcer of the very conformity that's destroying you. It makes you police others' authenticity because you've lost touch with your own. It uses your projections to maintain the collective denial that keeps everyone trapped. Think about your closest relationships. How much of your connection is based on shared dislikes? How often do you bond by talking about what's wrong with other people? How much of your identity is built on what you're not, rather than what you are? Jung called this the collective shadow, the repository of everything a culture has rejected about itself. And just like individual shadows, collective shadows don't disappear. They get projected onto other groups, other nations, other people who become convenient scapegoats for everything the culture refuses to own about itself. This is why you feel so much anger towards certain types of people, certain political views, certain ways of living. It's not really about them. It's about the parts of yourself you've disowned, the parts of your culture you've rejected, the parts of humanity you've decided are unacceptable. Your anger is information, your judgment is data, your triggers are breadcrumbs leading you back to the parts of yourself you've abandoned in your quest to be acceptable. But reclaiming these parts isn't about becoming a bad person, it's about becoming a whole person. It's about integrating the parts of yourself you've rejected so they stop controlling you from the shadows. The arrogance you hate in others, maybe it's connected to your own need to feel special, to be recognized, to matter. Instead of condemning it, what if you owned it? What if you admitted that you want to be important, that you crave recognition, that you have an ego that needs feeding, the selfishness you despise? Maybe it's pointing to your own neglected needs, your own suppressed desires, your own inability to put yourself first when necessary. What if instead of judging it, you learned from it? What if you admitted that you have needs too, that your desires matter, that taking care of yourself isn't evil? The laziness that triggers you, maybe it's connected to your own need for rest, for ease, for permission to not be productive every moment of your life. What if instead of condemning it, you honored it? What if you admitted that you're tired, that you need breaks, that your worth isn't tied to your output? This is individuation in action. This is the process of becoming psychologically whole. Not perfect, but complete. Not flawless, but integrated. Not pure, but authentic. Jung knew that the goal isn't to eliminate your shadow, it's to make friends with it. It's to own your full humanity instead of pretending to be a sanitized version of yourself. It's to admit that you contain multitudes, contradictions, complexity. But individuation is terrifying because it means disappointing people who've grown comfortable with your performance. It means being honest about your needs, your desires, your flaws, your humanity. It means risking rejection by people who preferred your mask to your face. Most people never take this risk. They'd rather maintain their projections than reclaim their power. They'd rather judge others than own themselves. They'd rather feel superior than feel whole. But here's what Jung discovered: the very qualities you've projected onto others often contain your greatest gifts. Your suppressed arrogance might contain your natural confidence. Your rejected selfishness might contain your healthy boundaries. Your disowned laziness might contain your need for rest and reflection. By refusing to own these qualities, you're not just maintaining your projections, you're abandoning your power. You're giving away pieces of yourself to maintain an image that isn't even real. This is why you feel so powerless, so frustrated, so incomplete. You've literally given away parts of yourself to other people through projection. You've made them responsible for carrying the traits you refuse to own. You've made them the villains in your story instead of recognizing them as mirrors reflecting your own disowned self. But the moment you start reclaiming your projections, everything changes. The moment you start owning your shadow instead of projecting it, you start becoming whole. The moment you stop making others responsible for your disowned traits, you start taking responsibility for your entire self. This is the beginning of real power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. Not the power to control, but the power to choose. Not the power to be perfect, but the power to be authentic. But this power comes with a price. It requires you to give up the comfort of your projections, the safety of your personas, the familiarity of your false self. It requires you to face the terror of not knowing who you are beneath all the masks you've worn. Most people aren't willing to pay this price. They'd rather live as acceptable fragments than risk being rejected as authentic wholes. They choose the familiar pain of self-betrayal over the unknown territory of self-acceptance. But you're different. You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready to face this truth. You wouldn't be listening if you weren't prepared to reclaim what you've lost. You wouldn't be questioning if you weren't ready to find answers. The architecture of your false self is elaborate, sophisticated, and deeply entrenched. But it's not permanent. It's not who you are. It's just a structure you built to survive in a world that punished authenticity. Now it's time to ask yourself, are you ready to tear down this structure and build something real in its place? Are you ready to stop projecting your power onto others and start owning your complete self? Are you ready to risk everything you think you know about yourself for the possibility of discovering who you actually are? Because that discovery is about to change everything. Once you understand how to reclaim your projections and integrate your shadow, once you learn to recognize your authentic self beneath all the masks, you'll never be able to go back to the comfortable lies you've been living. The question is, are you ready for that level of freedom? Are you ready to stop betraying yourself and start becoming yourself? Are you ready to discover what lies on the other side of authenticity? Because here's what Jung knew that most people never learn. The moment you stop running from your shadow and start walking toward it, everything changes. The moment you stop projecting your power onto others and start reclaiming it for yourself, you become dangerous to every system that profits from your self-abandonment. But this isn't about becoming perfect. This isn't about eliminating every flaw or transcending your humanity. This is about something far more radical, accepting yourself completely. All of it. The light and the dark, the admirable and the shameful, the parts you're proud of and the parts you'd rather pretend don't exist. Jung called this integration, and it's the most terrifying and liberating process you'll ever undertake. Because integration means you can no longer blame others for your problems. You can no longer make them responsible for your happiness. You can no longer use them as dumping grounds for the parts of yourself you refuse to own. Integration means growing up psychologically. It means taking responsibility for your entire inner world instead of expecting others to manage it for you. So how do you actually do this? How do you reclaim the parts of yourself you've been projecting onto others? How do you integrate your shadow instead of continuing to fight it? The first step is brutally simple and absolutely terrifying. You have to get curious about what you hate. Instead of pushing away your judgments, you have to lean into them. Instead of justifying your triggers, you have to investigate them. The next time someone really bothers you, instead of focusing on what's wrong with them, ask yourself this question: what part of me am I seeing in this person that I refuse to acknowledge? Sit with the discomfort of that question. Don't rush to defend yourself or explain why you're different. Just sit with the possibility that your trigger is information about you, not them. When you feel that familiar surge of superiority, that comfortable feeling of being better than someone else, stop. Notice it. Ask yourself, what am I trying to prove? What am I trying to avoid feeling? What part of myself am I trying to disown by making them the problem? This isn't about becoming a doormat or accepting unacceptable behavior from others. This is about understanding that your emotional reactions are always about you first. They're information about your internal world, your unhealed wounds, your disowned parts. The person who triggers your anger about their laziness might be showing you that you need rest. The individual who annoys you with their selfishness might be reflecting your own neglected needs. The one who irritates you with their sensitivity might be mirroring your own suppressed emotions. But here's where most people get stuck. They think integration means becoming like the people they judge. They think owning their laziness means becoming lazy, or acknowledging their selfishness means becoming selfish. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the psyche works. Integration doesn't mean acting on every impulse or embracing every negative trait. It means acknowledging that these impulses exist within you, understanding what they're trying to tell you, and choosing consciously how to respond to them. When you own your laziness, you don't become lazy, you become someone who understands their need for rest and can choose when to work and when to recharge. When you acknowledge your selfishness, you don't become selfish, you become someone who can advocate for their needs without guilt or manipulation. When you integrate your shadow, you don't become your shadow, you become whole. You become someone who can choose their responses instead of being controlled by their unconscious reactions. This is where real power lives, not in denying your humanity, but in owning it completely, not in pretending to be perfect, but in being authentic, not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. But integration is just the beginning. Once you start reclaiming your projections, once you begin owning your shadow, you have to face an even bigger challenge: learning to distinguish between your authentic voice and all the other voices in your head. Right now, your mind is crowded with other people's opinions, expectations, and judgments. Your parents' voice telling you what success should look like, your culture's voice defining what's normal and acceptable, your peer group's voice demanding conformity, your society's voice promising rewards for compliance. These voices are so loud, so persistent, so familiar that you've mistaken them for your own thoughts. You've confused their desires with your desires, their fears with your fears, their values with your values. But underneath all that noise, there's another voice, quieter, steadier, more certain. It's the voice that knew what you wanted before the world told you what you should want. It's the voice that felt excited about things before you learned they were impractical or inappropriate. It's the voice that whispered, "This isn't right," when you were making choices that betrayed your true nature. That voice is your authentic self, and it's been waiting patiently for you to remember how to listen. Learning to hear this voice requires practice, patience, and a willingness to disappoint people who've grown comfortable with your performance. It requires you to pay attention to what energizes you versus what drains you. It requires you to notice what you do because you want to versus what you do because you think you should. Start paying attention to your body's responses to different situations. Your authentic self doesn't just speak through thoughts, it speaks through energy, through excitement, through that feeling of rightness when something aligns with who you truly are. Notice what makes you lose track of time. Notice what you do when no one is watching. Notice what you were drawn to as a child before you learned it wasn't practical or appropriate. Notice what you still think about doing but talk yourself out of. These are breadcrumbs leading back to your authentic self. These are messages from the part of you that never forgot who you really are. But here's the challenge: the moment you start listening to your authentic voice, the moment you start making choices based on your true desires rather than others' expectations, people around you will notice, and they won't all be happy about it. The people who benefited from your people-pleasing will resist your new boundaries. The family members who counted on your compliance will push back against your independence. The friends who bonded with you through shared judgments will feel threatened by your new self-acceptance. This is the loneliest part of the authenticity process. because you have to be willing to risk losing relationships that were built on your false self in order to create space for relationships based on who you actually are. Most people get scared at this stage and retreat back to their familiar personas. They decide that authenticity is too expensive, that the price of being real is too high. They choose the known pain of self-betrayal over the unknown territory of authentic living. But Jung knew something that changes everything. The relationships you lose by being authentic were never real relationships anyway. They were contracts based on your performance, transactions based on your compliance, arrangements based on your willingness to abandon yourself for others' comfort. Real relationships can only exist between real people, and if you never show your real self, you can never have real relationships. You can have familiar relationships, comfortable relationships, predictable relationships, but not real ones. The moment you start being authentic, you give others permission to be authentic too. The moment you stop performing, you create space for genuine connection. The moment you risk being rejected for who you are, you open the possibility of being loved for who you are. But this process requires tremendous courage. It requires you to trust that who you are is enough, even when the world has spent your entire life convincing you otherwise. It requires you to bet everything on your own worth, even when you're not sure you believe in it yourself. This is where most people need support. This is where the process of individuation becomes not just a personal process, but a relational one. Because while you have to do the work of reclaiming yourself, you don't have to do it alone. Find people who are on their own authenticity process. Find mentors who've walked this path before you. Find therapists, coaches, or guides who understand the psychological territory you're navigating. Find communities of people who value truth over comfort, growth over safety, authenticity over acceptance. These relationships will sustain you when the old relationships begin to shift or end. These connections will remind you that you're not crazy for wanting to be real in a world that rewards performance. These people will reflect back to you the beauty of your authentic self when you're too scared to see it yourself. But ultimately, the most important relationship you need to heal is the one with yourself. You need to learn to be your own best friend instead of your own worst critic. You need to develop the capacity to comfort yourself when you're scared, to encourage yourself when you're discouraged, to forgive yourself when you make mistakes. This means learning to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. It means replacing the harsh internal critic with a compassionate internal guide. It means treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a friend going through a difficult time. Most people are terrible at this. They've learned to be so harsh with themselves, so demanding, so critical, that they wouldn't treat an enemy the way they treat themselves internally. They've internalized every critical voice from their past and made it their constant companion. But you can change this. You can learn to be gentle with yourself. You can develop the capacity for self-compassion that will sustain you through the difficult process of becoming authentic. Start by noticing how you talk to yourself. Notice the tone, the words, the energy of your internal dialogue. Would you speak to a child this way? Would you speak to a friend this way? If not, why is it acceptable to speak to yourself this way? Begin experimenting with a different internal voice. When you make a mistake, instead of attacking yourself, try curiosity. That's interesting. I wonder what I was trying to accomplish there. What can I learn from this? When you're scared, instead of criticizing your fear, try compassion. Of course you're scared. This is new territory. It makes sense that you would feel uncertain. This isn't about lowering your standards or accepting mediocrity. This is about creating an internal environment that supports growth rather than punishing it. This is about becoming your own ally in the process of becoming yourself. Because here's what Jung understood. The process of individuation never ends. It's not a destination you reach, but a way of living. It's not a problem you solve once, but a practice you commit to for life. There will always be new layers of conditioning to shed, new projections to reclaim, new aspects of yourself to integrate. There will always be situations that trigger your old patterns, relationships that challenge your new boundaries, circumstances that test your commitment to authenticity. But each time you choose authenticity over acceptance, each time you choose truth over comfort, each time you choose yourself over others' expectations, you strengthen the muscle of authentic living. You prove to yourself that it's possible to be real in a world that profits from your performance, and something magical begins to happen. The more authentic you become, the more you attract authentic people into your life. The more you own your complete self, the more others feel permission to do the same. The more you model what it looks like to live from the inside out, the more you inspire others to question their own performance. Your authenticity becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. It becomes proof that it's possible to be fully human in a world that demands perfection. It becomes evidence that you can be loved for who you are, rather than who you think you should be. This is your responsibility now, not just to yourself, but to future generations, not just for your own freedom, but for the collective liberation of human consciousness. Every time you choose authenticity, you break a link in the chain of inherited trauma. Every time you refuse to abandon yourself, you model a different way of being for your children, your friends, your community. You become living proof that the system of conformity and self-abandonment is not inevitable. You become evidence that another way is possible. But this path requires everything from you. It requires you to give up the comfort of your familiar personas, the safety of your projections, the predictability of your performance. It requires you to risk everything you think you know about yourself and others for the possibility of discovering who you actually are. The question is, are you ready? Are you ready to stop living someone else's life and start living your own? Are you ready to stop performing for approval and start being yourself for the pure joy of existence? Are you ready to stop betraying yourself and start becoming yourself? Because the world is waiting for your authenticity. The people in your life are hungry for real connection. The children watching you are looking for examples of what it means to be fully human. Your authentic self isn't just a personal luxury, it's a gift to the world. It's your unique contribution to the collective awakening of human consciousness. It's your way of participating in the great work of healing the split between who we are and who we think we should be. The time for performance is over. The time for pretending is finished. The time for self-betrayal has ended. It's time to come home to yourself. It's time to reclaim the parts of yourself you've given away. It's time to integrate your shadow, own your projections, and step into the fullness of who you've always been. The invisible prison that's held you captive your entire life is about to crumble, not through force but through recognition, not through struggle but through acceptance, not through changing yourself but through finally being yourself. This is your moment. This is your choice. This is your chance to set yourself free. What are you waiting for?